Senator Lummis.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to start, Mr. Green, with you. I want to make sure in my short time that you have the opportunity to share all of the recommendations that you would make to us and further encourage you to make the same kind of presentations to either the National Governors Association or to their groups. There's a Midwestern Governors Association, there's a Southern Governors Association, there's a Western Governors Association. Some states belong to several of those, but almost everybody belongs to the National Governors Association. The governors need to hear this too. And so I strongly encourage you to make use of that venue. That said, please use as much of my remaining 4 minutes as you feel you need to give us more ideas about what the solutions are, the answers to this big problem.
Thank you so much, Senator. I would say we have an array of responses, but I think the most impactful things that we can do are to be able to identify these contracts where they exist, and the recordation plays such a huge role. It cannot be overstated that being able to enforce contract law requires the recognition of where these properties are, who the owners are, and who the counterparties that can be dealt with. For us, having the capital to be able to provide, but not knowing how to reach potential sellers is corrosive.
Did you say you are in 18 states?
We're in 18 states today.
18 states.
Our pipeline today would take us into as many as 30 states.
Wow. Okay. Excuse the interruption. Go ahead.
No problem at all. I would point out that these are overweighted in the Midwest and the South for reasons that are consistent with ones that were pointed out by my colleagues. But what I would point out that some of our findings are really that at the base of any solution has to be some encouragement around how to finance, because it's not simply the fact that you cannot finance the purchase. In many of these cases, these lower cost properties have the sorts of deferred maintenance conditions that have been referred to by both of my colleagues here. And so despite the fact that we have been able to transfer significant equity to many of these families, for the same reasons that they can't get a primary mortgage, cannot tap that equity in order to make basic needed repairs. So if your house has a leaky roof, it simply needs to be replaced. You may be comfortable making your monthly payment, for instance, but completely unable to make those capital improvements. Mm-hmm. So sweat equity and other sorts of things have played a larger role than practical for many families. So creating the capacity to finance. What many families don't realize when they're on the wrong end of these lease option arrangements are that not only can they not exercise their option because perhaps the house is overvalued, but because there simply isn't a mortgage that's available. There's no lenders. It requires a lender essentially the same work to underwrite a $500,000 mortgage as a $50,000 mortgage, and so the industry tends not to produce enough of the latter.
Okay, so could we focus on that for just a second? Because in Wyoming, I find that most of our banks are state-chartered community banks. They're small banks.
Sure.
And the more requirements that are placed on them by us federally, the harder it is for them to spend the time, the paperwork, to do those small mortgages. And so they just decide not to. And then people are shifted to these contract for deed type situations because the banks are excluded from the transaction. They don't need a bank. But then you have some unscrupulous private financiers that we've been hearing about during this hearing. So you are that alternative, it sounds like. Your company, Blackstar, tries to identify those contracts for deed and get them back to a product that is more like a traditional mortgage. Am I stating that fairly?
That is actually a traditional mortgage.
Okay, so your number one request would be to be able to identify these contracts for deeds so you can approach the person who is subject to the contract?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the number one certainly is the recordation so that we can identify it. I would say enforcement actions. Many states do have laws on the books that would take the teeth out of some of the sting that is provided to families who are subject to forfeiture and on the wrong end of the bad faith actions. But unfortunately, the enforcement, the advocacy tends to be poor. It tends to rely on groups like NCLC. And so unless a family raises their hand to be advocated for, then they are they're left twisting in the wind.
Yep,
So,
that makes perfect sense to me. My time is up, but I want to thank you for that. I further, if it's all right, Madam Chairman, Ms. Mancini, sounds like you have a fairly comprehensive understanding of what state laws are around the nation. And I'd ask you to provide that to the committee so that we can go through and have a better inventory of what state laws look like and which states are in need of some advice from us or something stronger than advice from us. Thank you. Thanks so much, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Senator Lummis. So I want to just